Hey guys, welcome back to another Bolt Breakdown with Alex here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Hunter Henry. So, a couple weeks ago, I did the internal free agents that the Chargers have video where I broke down what they might do with Melvin Ingram, what they might do with Hunter Henry, and the whole list of guys. So, if you want to check that out, you can. But I want to dive a little bit more into Hunter Henry because that is clearly the Chargers' most pivotal internal free agent. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. As I said, he did have an interview on Sirius XM NFL radio yesterday, which we'll get to. There were some rumors about the Chargers being in play for Zach Ertz, which we'll also get to. But I want to talk about his situation as a whole right now and what the Chargers' options are first. So let me just share my screen a little bit. And the first thing I want to talk about is what is Hunter Henry's actual contract situation? So last year, the Chargers signed Hunter Henry to a $10.6 million franchise tag. So of course, franchise tag is a 1-year type deal. You can use the franchise tag twice in a row, and then you cannot use it on that player anymore. Of course, every team gets one franchise tag. So just browsing through SpotTrack, his expected market value is about 11 million, as you can see right here. So SpotTrack has his 4-year contract, if you want to project it like that, at 4 years, about $44 million. I think it could go a little bit higher than that, if we're kind of talking about it. I think it could be 4 years, 45. It could also be a little bit higher, maybe let's say 12 million per year. That would bring him to about 4 years, 48 million. So if you go down here, you've seen the recent tight end contracts that have been given. And you have George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Austin Hooper, and Kyle Rudolph. So Kelce obviously is at 15 million, Kelce at 14, Hooper at 10.5, Kyle Rudolph at 9 million. So you average all of those contracts out, and you get about this 12.3 million value for Hunter Henry. And I think that's about what Hunter Henry will end up getting per year. I think he'll be in between Austin Hooper and Travis Kelce. Whether that's 11 million or 12 million, I don't think that is a big deal. I mean, a lot of people will pay attention to the per year value of the contract that Hunter Henry signs. But as we've seen with Telesco, as we've seen with many GMs around the league, teams sometimes front load contracts, put some of it as signing bonus. That's another thing that's been done, and ultimately reduce the yearly cap hits from being so high, right? And I think also for the tight end position, the thing that's really important about it that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot with other positions is the guaranteed money. Because tight ends get beat up, they get injured. We've seen it with Hunter Henry, we saw it with George Kittle last year, we've seen it with Zach Ertz. Tight ends get beat up, and oftentimes tight ends get cut. Maybe they move on to another team. That doesn't happen to the top of line tight ends, but it can happen. We've seen teams move on from tight ends after injuries at a pretty decent rate. That's not to say that's what's going to happen with Hunter Henry later in his career, or that's what's going to happen with Ertz or Kelce or Kittle. But it is a very physical position because you do need to block and you do get beat up. And we've seen Hunter Henry have a lot of injuries. So I think the guaranteed money will be what's really key here. And if you want to look at these deals, we'll go kind of by each one individually. I know the Kittle guaranteed money was 40 million. The Kelce guaranteed money was about 27 million. I'm actually curious as to what the Austin Hooper guaranteed money was. I don't think it was nearly that high, but I guess we'll see in a minute. Austin Hooper had about 23 million guaranteed. So I think if you take Austin Hooper's 23 million guaranteed and you take Kelce's 27 million guaranteed, that's probably where Hunter Henry lands in terms of guaranteed money, right? So if he has a 4-year, $45 million deal, let's say, I think it's fair to say he'll probably get 25 or 26 million guaranteed, right? And that creates a situation for the Chargers, which is interesting because that's not a super high guaranteed value. That basically means that after 2 years or so of the contract of a 4-year deal, you would have basically already paid all the money off. And then the rest of the contract would be probably unguaranteed and based on just how much he plays and how many seasons he plays after that, right? So I think those are kind of fair numbers for what we're going to see for Henry. So I would project if he does get a contract extension, a 4-year, $45 million deal with around 25 million guaranteed. I think that's probably what you would see. So that's a little higher in terms of market value, but maybe not huge in terms of guaranteed money. And the other option the Chargers have, as we've seen with many free agents before, is the franchise tag. It's not something that people like to talk about, or players specifically like to talk about. But Hunter Henry did mention this in his Sirius XM NFL radio interview yesterday. You can go check out the clip there. I don't think I can play it because I have my headphones in. But Hunter Henry said two quotes in this interview that were interesting. First, I want to play somewhere with a good quarterback, which we'll get to in a second. But he also said the franchise tag is ultimately out of his control. He viewed last year's franchise tag as a prove-it deal. And so, we'll see. It's sort of out of his control, right? As a player, you don't want to get franchise tag. You do want that long-term security. But ultimately, there's not a lot Hunter Henry can do if the Chargers decide to franchise tag him. Now, as I said, I think at the beginning of this video, you can only tag a franchise player twice in a row, as we saw with Kirk Cousins and I guess a couple other players in NFL history. After that, it has to be long-term extension or they're walking, right? But it's not quite that simple. Obviously, we've seen teams apply the franchise tag and then revoke the franchise tag later once they've agreed on a long-term extension, right? We saw this with Melvin Ingram in 2016. Melvin Ingram got signed to the franchise tag and then signed the extension, basically throwing out the franchise tag later anyway. I think that's probably similar that what would happen to Hunter Henry if he was actually franchise tagged again. I think the Chargers will ultimately want to get a deal done in free agency rather than have to apply the franchise tag. But we'll see what happens. I think they view the franchise tag as a last ditch option, though. So that sort of brings us to another uncomfortable conversation, which is what if Hunter Henry wants to walk, right? If Hunter Henry and his representation really want to go to the Colts or the Patriots or any other team, he's going to have a sit down at some point with Tom Telesco, probably virtually because of COVID. But we saw some backup plans for the Chargers if Hunter Henry wants to walk. One that was reported by Sports Illustrated this week was Zach Ertz. The Chargers apparently have joined the trade talk for Zach Ertz shortly after the Carson Wentz trade to Indianapolis. And look, we were sort of talking about a couple podcasts ago, we were talking about backup options if the Chargers can't re-sign Hunter Henry. And the kind of names we were mentioning were, in free agency, Gerald Everett, Mo Alley Cox. We were talking about going through the draft when it came to tight ends. So that was Hunter Long. That was Brevin Jordan, if they really want to spend that high of a pick. Zach Ertz is the best possible replacement you can get if Hunter Henry walks, and it's not even close. I know Zach Ertz had a down year last year, and that's what a lot of people will pay attention to, but he was out for 5 games with an injury, and he had the worst starting quarterback play in the league. I don't think that can be ignored when it comes to his stats or his numbers and what he put up. And also before this year, he was a 3-time Pro Bowler 3 times in a row, right? And so Zach Ertz is interesting. He wants to be traded, obviously, because they didn't reach a long-term contract extension. And if there isn't a resolution and that comes in the form of trade, Ertz may ask for his release, which would make him a free agent along with Hunter Henry and a lot of these other tight ends. So Ertz is something that's interesting to watch. I think it's only an option if Hunter Henry decides he wants to walk to Indianapolis or New England. But I think if you trade probably a 4th-round pick, I think you can acquire Zach Ertz for that. It's sort of a mid-round pick. Tight end value isn't super high, but Zach Ertz is a top 5 tight end in the league right after Kittle, Kelsey, and Waller, in my opinion. I think he's the 4th guy there. And if Hunter Henry does leave, I think the Chargers absolutely have to look into the possibility of Zach Ertz. And to go over some other backup options, I think we talked about this a little bit when it came to the internal free agents video I did. But when it comes to the tight end position, there just isn't a lot there in free agency outside of Henry. Ertz may join the fray at some point, but here's how it breaks down. Gronk, I mean, he's going to go back to Tampa. I don't think that's, or retire. Probably come back to Tampa, though. Jared Cook, I think he'll probably stay in New Orleans. I don't think he's really going anywhere. But he's also not that appealing of an option. He kind of had worse numbers than Hunter Henry last year, but also had worse quarterback play. I guess Brees wasn't great. And then at that point, after those two, it's really Croft, Eifert, guys you're taking a chance on, right? Jacob Hollister, maybe he has a breakout year. Virgil Green is then, a backup blocking tight end, right? So once you get to this point, or it's a guy like Mercedes Lewis, who is a, very old NFL veteran, so the tight end market just isn't great. You have a guy like Gerald Everett, who I think is very intriguing because he's mostly been a backup tight end. So if you promote him to a first-string tight end, we could really see what he might be able to do now that he's not, wouldn't be playing behind Tyler Higbee or any of those guys. But there's not much in the tight end market. Jonnu Smith is going to be a guy that's due for a pay raise, but I think he'll ultimately stay in Tennessee. I'm just curious actually to see what his market value is. I'm sure it'll probably be relatively high. I mean, he would get about 8 or 9 million. He's, I think, 2 years younger than Hunter Henry, but to me, I would rather have Hunter Henry than Jonnu Smith on a long-term contract extension. But as you can see in this market, and you see the names listed, really the names are Hunter Henry, maybe Zach Ertz if he is released, and then you're taking a chance on all of these guys after it. Mo Alley Cox, I think, is another guy that's, somewhere around here. He's sort of towards the bottom. But I think he'll ultimately stay with the Colts. He's kind of an IRFA. So he's not really an unrestricted free agent yet. But as you can see, when it comes to free agent options in terms of replacing Hunter Henry, it's kind of a bare bones market. That's just the reality. And now, if you want to go through the draft, I think that might be an interesting place. But we've sort of talked about the options that are there. We talked about Brevin Jordan. We've talked about Hunter Long. There's a lot of guys you can get in the draft. My thing with the draft, though, is unless you're taking a tight end super high, like a Kyle Pitts, I don't think there's any guy in the draft that can come in next year and do what Hunter Henry does, right? Which is be a top 10 tight end in the league. And I just think that's the reality of the situation. Now, what I'm not against is the Chargers re-signing Hunter Henry or trading for Zach Ertz, and then on top of that, drafting a younger tight end to sort of create a Ertz Goddard situation or a Gronk Hernandez situation that we saw in New England, right? If you want to do something like that and develop a 2 tight end system, I think that could play out really well for the Chargers, but that will kind of depend on Staley's offensive philosophy as well as Joe Lombardi's, right? Do they want to run a lot of 2 tight end sets? We're not really sure what they want to do from, in terms of being that detailed on the offensive side of the ball yet. I do want to talk about what Hunter Henry said yesterday. We talked about the quote about the franchise tag and getting franchise tag twice in a row, which he said was out of his control. But the quote that got a lot of people's attention was, "I want to play somewhere where there is a good quarterback." Now, this quote, a lot of people took this maybe as a slight against Justin Herbert. I don't think it was intended that way. I think he likes Justin Herbert a lot. I think he was just saying, look, you want to be in the best possible situation to succeed. And if a team has a good quarterback, you're in a position. So when we talk about the teams that are kind of Hunter Henry candidates, right? The Colts and Patriots were 2 of them that were kind of heavily rumored. But the Patriots QB situation isn't figured out by any means. They're probably going to let Cam Newton walk, and then they're kind of in the free agent market or they're in the draft market. So I don't know if that affects the Patriots big time as a contender for Hunter Henry, but it might. And we talk about the Colts. Breaking news this week was, of course, Carson Wentz was traded to them for a conditional second and a 3rd round pick. So Carson Wentz is going to be the starter there, at least to start the year. at the very least, right? So they're going forward with Carson. Uh, if we're talking about those three teams, Herbert is the best quarterback. Considering Wentz's year last year, considering the Patriot situation is up in the air, I think Herbert having the season he did last year, impressing Henry and many of his teammates, I think that's a feather in the cap for the Chargers in this free agency. I don't think he's going to take dramatically less money to play with Herbert if the Chargers offer him 25 million guaranteed and another team offers him 30. I don't think Justin Herbert or having that bridges the gap. But if you're going to have teams with similar offers, I think you're going to take, Hunter Henry is going to take whatever the best situation is, whether that's the Pats, the Chargers, or the Colts, right? And so that makes a lot of sense, I think. There will be other teams, I'm sure, that are after Hunter Henry's services. Tight end depth just really isn't big in the league right now. There's, we can talk about like a top 10 tight end list, but the guys at the end of that top 10 aren't great. It's a really thin group compared to maybe how it usually is in some years, especially with the injuries that have been going around. And, there's just not a lot of guys that stretch the field. And so when you find one of those guys, it's sort of important. Or you find a guy that's maybe not a great field stretcher like Hunter Henry. He's not going to go deep a lot, but Hunter Henry did become a very good blocker last year, which is an important thing to note. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of the wrap on Hunter Henry's free agency, and sort of what I think the Chargers could do with him. I think they ultimately will want to reach a 4-year extension with him. That makes a lot of sense. He's 27 now. By the end of that contract, he would be just 31, and would probably be looking for another contract at that point. But I think you're looking at ultimately a 4-year deal for him, probably in the neighborhood of 45 to 50 million. I think the guaranteed money is what's really important about Hunter Henry's free agency and tight end free agency in general, just because those guys do get beat up. Of course, everyone cares about the guaranteed money. I forget who it was that said it, but, I think there was an ESPN analyst who once said, the guaranteed money is the real money and all the other money and years on the contract is monopoly money, right? So guaranteed money is going to be really important when it comes to Hunter Henry or a lot of these top free agents. So I think that's something to keep in mind. The franchise tag is another option, as I mentioned before. I think that's going to be sort of a last, worst case scenario for the Chargers is that they use the franchise tag again. And it'll probably be around whatever the average or whatever the high tight end salary is. I think it'll be around 12 million. The franchise tag last year was 10.6. I think it's reasonable that it would be around 11 or 12 this year, but that's all kind of TBD. But again, this is the last possible year the Chargers can use the franchise tag and then would be under pressure to get a deal done like they did with Melvin Ingram a couple of years ago. So that's something to keep in mind. And then in terms of the replacement options, if Hunter Henry's agent calls Tom Telesco and says, hey, I want to walk in free agency to another team, Zach Ertz, I think, is the best option. If you want to trade a 4th-round pick for him, I think he's the best you're going to do. He is still a top 5 tight end in this league that suffered from the worst quarterback play in the league last year. I think Ertz, if you have to replace Henry, is the best you're going to do. And he may be released. So that's, in that situation, you wouldn't have to give up any draft capital. Other options, obviously, we talked about Gerald Everett, who I think is a promising second string tight end that could be promoted to a role. I think he does have some promise, but he's not ready, I think, immediately to be a first string tight end on day one. And then the other guys in this free agency class, other than maybe Jonnu Smith, are guys you're taking a chance on. It is not a great free agent tight end class. It's not a great draft class either. So that's important when talking about Henry and Ertz and all these other possibilities. And then lastly, to kind of summarize his Sirius XM NFL radio interview that sort of caused a little bit of a firestorm on Twitter yesterday, I do think Hunter Henry values Justin Herbert being his quarterback, especially after this year and his Rookie of the Year campaign. But there are other good quarterbacks in the league. How does he view Hunter Henry? How does he view Justin Herbert and Carson Wentz? How does he view, what did the Patriots do in free agency? That's going to be crucial. What did they do in the draft when it comes to the quarterback situation? If the Patriots, land a big name at quarterback that a lot of people like, that could certainly swing the balances in terms of where Hunter Henry wants to go. But I don't think Hunter Henry said a lot in this interview that we didn't already know, right? Teams or players are looking for the best combination of quarterback situation, or, the best situation for them personally and the best financial, situation, right? So they're looking for that mix of on the field and, of course, their pockets, right? So that's kind of important to know. I don't think he said anything that people should get mad about. That's just how the business works. It is a business. It is a profession. Yes, please, miss me with your, oh, well, they make a lot of money anyway remarks. It's a business. But I think that basically sums it up on Hunter Henry. So let me know in the comments below what you think about Hunter Henry's free agency. What do you think the Chargers should do? What do you think they will do? Are there any replacements that you like for Hunter Henry? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, I love doing these bolt breakdowns on the channel. Leave a like and a comment down below. Subscribe and hit the bell as well if you want to do that. But I will see you guys next week.